She threw me on the street the day after my son's funeral, claiming the house was hers now. At the will reading, she laughed. "Hope you enjoy being homeless, Eleanor." Then the lawyer opened the sealed envelope. "If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now, hit that like button if you enjoy stories about karma. And let me tell you how this all started. Because sometimes the best revenge is just letting people reveal exactly who they really are." The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. David's voice on the other end was strained, breathless. "Mom, something's wrong. My chest. I can't." The line went dead. By the time I reached the hospital, my 45-year-old son was gone. "Massive heart attack," the doctor explained with clinical detachment. Nothing they could do. Stephanie stood beside me in the sterile waiting room, her face a mask of shock, but I caught something else in her expression. Relief? No. Surely I was imagining things in my grief. "What happens now?" I whispered, still unable to process that David, my healthy, vibrant son, was simply gone. Stephanie straightened her shoulders, and for a moment, her composure slipped. "Now we deal with reality, Eleanor. David's gone, and I have decisions to make." The coldness in her voice sent a chill through me. We'd never been close, Stephanie and I, but David had always been the bridge between us. Now that bridge was gone, and I was beginning to understand just how deep the chasm really was. "Of course, dear. We'll get through this together," I said, reaching for her hand. She pulled away. "We'll see about that." I should have recognized the warning in those words. Instead, I attributed her coldness to shock. People grieve differently, I told myself. Some become emotional, others turn inward. Stephanie was clearly the latter. The funeral arrangements consumed the next 3 days. I offered to help pay for everything. David had been my only child after all. But Stephanie insisted on handling it herself. "I'm his wife," she kept saying. "I know what he would have wanted." Fair enough. I focused on writing his eulogy, calling relatives, and trying to hold myself together. At 67, I'd buried my parents and my husband, but losing a child felt like a special kind of hell. The night before the funeral, as I sat in what had been David's childhood bedroom in the house he'd shared with Stephanie, I found myself staring at the framed photos on the dresser. David graduating college, David and Stephanie's wedding, David holding his nephew at Christmas last year. What I didn't see were any photos of David and me from recent years. Stephanie had systematically removed them, I realized. When had that happened? A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Stephanie stood in the doorway, no longer bothering to hide the calculating look in her eyes. "We need to talk, Eleanor." The funeral was beautiful. I'll give Stephanie that. The flower arrangements were elegant. The music was David's favorite hymns, and the reception afterward was perfectly orchestrated. What wasn't beautiful was watching my daughter-in-law play the grieving widow while making pointed comments about moving forward and new chapters. I stood in the receiving line, accepting condolences from friends and family, when I overheard Stephanie talking to her sister behind the flower arrangements. "The life insurance alone will cover the mortgage for 2 years, she was saying in a low voice. "And without the extra expenses." "Extra expenses? What extra expenses?" "What about Eleanor?" her sister asked. "Where will she go?" Stephanie's laugh was sharp and brittle. "That's not my problem anymore. She can figure it out like the rest of us adults." My blood ran cold. I'd been living with them for 2 years, ever since I'd sold my own home to help with their down payment. David had insisted it would be temporary, just until I found something smaller and more manageable. Somehow, temporary had stretched into permanent, and I'd grown comfortable in the routine of helping with the house, cooking dinner, being useful. Apparently, I'd been naive. "Eleanor." Stephanie appeared at my elbow, her public face firmly in place. "Could you help me in the kitchen? There are some things we need to discuss." I followed her through the crowd of mourners, nodding at neighbors and accepting final hugs from my sister, who was flying back to Phoenix in the morning. In the kitchen, Stephanie closed the door and turned to face me. "I'm going to be direct," she said, her voice calm and businesslike. "This house is in David's name, which means it's mine now. I need time and space to process my grief without complications." "Complications?" I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "You living here. It's not working anymore, Eleanor. I need my privacy." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Stephanie, I understand you're grieving, but surely we can— No, she held up a hand. I've made my decision. I'll give you until tomorrow evening to pack your things. That should be plenty of time. I stared at her, searching for any sign of the woman who'd once called me Mom, who'd hugged me at Christmas dinners, who'd cried when David proposed. That woman was gone, replaced by someone cold and calculating. Where exactly do you expect me to go? Stephanie shrugged. You're a grown woman, Eleanor. You'll figure something out. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. David would be horrified by this conversation. David's dead. The words came out flat, final. And the sooner you accept that, the better off we'll both be. I packed my entire life into 4 suitcases and 2 boxes. 67 years reduced to what would fit in the trunk of my car. As I folded my clothes and wrapped my few remaining photographs, I kept waiting for Stephanie to come upstairs and apologize, to say she'd spoken in grief, and of course I could stay until I found somewhere else to go. She never came. Instead, at exactly 6 p.m. the next day, she appeared in my doorway with her arms crossed. Time's up, Eleanor. I zipped the last suitcase closed and looked around the room that had been my sanctuary for 2 years. The walls were bare now, stripped of the few personal touches I'd been allowed to add. It looked like a guest room again, which I supposed it always had been. I'll need a few more minutes to get everything to the car, I said. I'll help you. It wasn't an offer. It was a statement. Stephanie wanted me gone, and she wanted to make sure it happened quickly. We made 3 trips in silence. As I loaded the last box into my car, I turned to say goodbye, maybe to make one final appeal to whatever remained of her humanity. I know you're angry with me for some reason, I said quietly. I wish I knew what I'd done wrong so I could fix it. Stephanie's expression didn't soften. You didn't do anything wrong. Eleanor, you just exist. In my space, in my life, in my way. David felt sorry for you, but I don't. The honesty was brutal and somehow cleaner than the polite fiction we'd been maintaining. I see. I got into my car and rolled down the window. Will you at least tell me if there's going to be a formal reading of David's will? I assume he left something? Why would he leave you anything? Stephanie's voice was genuinely puzzled. You're not his wife, and it's not like you ever contributed financially to our household. The irony was so sharp it actually made me smile. The $40,000 I'd given them for the down payment might disagree with that assessment. But clearly Stephanie had either conveniently forgotten or genuinely convinced herself it had been a gift. Of course, I said. Silly of me to assume. I drove away without looking back, heading toward the Hampton Inn on Route 9. It was the closest hotel I could afford while I figured out what came next. In the rearview mirror, I watched Stephanie stand in the driveway until my car disappeared around the corner. At the hotel, I checked in for a week and carried my suitcases to a generic room that smelled like industrial cleaning products and broken dreams. I sat on the polyester bedspread and stared at my reflection in the mirror above the dresser. Who was this woman looking back at me? A widow, now childless, homeless, and apparently worthless in the eyes of the only family she had left. But as I sat there in that sterile room, something unexpected began to stir in my chest. Not despair, though that was there too. Something sharper, something that felt almost like anticipation. Stephanie thought she'd won. She thought she'd successfully discarded the inconvenient mother-in-law and claimed her prize. What she didn't know was that David had been a much better son than she'd ever given him credit for. 2 weeks into my hotel stay, just as I was starting to seriously worry about my dwindling savings, the call came from David's lawyer. Mrs. Fairfield, this is James Morrison from Morrison & Associates. I handled your son's legal affairs. Yes, Mr. Morrison, I remember meeting you at David and Stephanie's house closing. I'm calling to inform you that the probate process is complete, and there will be a formal reading of David's will next Tuesday at 2 p.m. in my office. Your presence is required. My presence was required? I sat up straighter, ignoring the way the cheap mattress springs protested. I'm sorry, but I think there might be some confusion. Stephanie seemed to think, Mrs. Fairfield, Mr. Morrison interrupted gently. I can only tell you what David's will specifies, and it specifically names you as a beneficiary. I'll see you next Tuesday at 2 p.m. After he hung up, I stared at my phone for a long moment. David had left me something after all, probably some small keepsake, maybe his father's watch, or the photo albums from his childhood. Stephanie wouldn't be happy about it. but she'd have to live with whatever David had decided. I spent the weekend apartment hunting online, looking at senior living communities and modest one-bedroom rentals within my budget. My savings account could cover another week at the hotel, plus first month's rent and a security deposit. But I'd need to be careful. Social Security and the small pension from my teaching career would have to stretch further than I'd originally planned. At 1:45 p.m. the following Tuesday, I sat in the parking lot of Morrison & Associates, watching Stephanie emerge from a silver BMW wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly budget. She'd brought someone with her, a man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone. When I walked into the reception area, Stephanie's face darkened. "What is she doing here?" she demanded of the receptionist. "Mrs. Fairfield is here for the will reading," the young woman replied professionally. "Which Mrs. Fairfield?" Stephanie's voice rose slightly. "Both of you, apparently." The man in the suit, who I now recognized as Stephanie's brother Marcus, leaned over to whisper something in her ear. She nodded curtly and took a seat across the waiting room from me, making it clear that whatever temporary civility might have existed between us was officially over. Mr. Morrison appeared promptly at 2 p.m. and ushered us into his office. He was a kind-faced man in his 60s with silver hair and gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of lawyer who probably still believed in doing right by his clients. "Ladies, gentlemen," he began, settling behind his mahogany desk. "I know this is a difficult time, but David was very specific about his wishes. I'll read the will in its entirety, and then we can discuss any questions." Stephanie sat forward eagerly, her hands clasped in her lap. Marcus had pulled out a legal pad and was preparing to take notes. I simply folded my hands and waited. The first part of the will was exactly what I'd expected. Stephanie inherited the house, the cars, David's retirement accounts, and his life insurance policy. She nodded approvingly at each item, occasionally glancing at me with something that looked like satisfaction. Then Mr. Morrison's voice changed slightly, and I knew we were approaching something important. There is, however, one final provision that David added just 3 months ago. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Stephanie stopped nodding and leaned forward, her eyes sharp with sudden attention. Marcus set down his pen, and I found myself holding my breath. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat and continued reading. "To my mother, Eleanor Fairfield, who provided the down payment for our home and has never asked for repayment, I leave the contents of Safety Deposit Box U337 at First National Bank, along with all associated documentation and account information contained therein." "What safety deposit box?" Stephanie's voice was sharp. "David never mentioned a safety deposit box." Mr. Morrison looked up from the document. Apparently it was something he maintained privately. He was quite specific that the contents should go to his mother. I was as surprised as Stephanie, but for different reasons. David had never mentioned a safety deposit box to me either. What could he possibly have put there that was meant for me? "What's in it?" Marcus asked, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "I have no idea," Mr. Morrison replied honestly. "David simply provided the bank information and instructions that Mrs. Fairfield should have full access upon his death." Stephanie's face was flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. If there's anything of value in that box, it should be part of the estate. We need to contest this." "You're certainly free to try," Mr. Morrison said mildly, "but the provision is very clear, and David was completely competent when he added it to his will. I witnessed the document myself." "When exactly did he add this provision?" I asked quietly. Mr. Morrison consulted his notes. 3 months ago, February 15th, he came in specifically to make this addition. February 15th. I remembered that date clearly because it was the day after Valentine's Day, and David had seemed unusually quiet during our family dinner. Stephanie had been complaining about something, the neighbor's dog, I think, and David had barely spoken throughout the meal. "This is a waste of time," Stephanie snapped, standing abruptly. "Marcus, let's go. We'll file a challenge tomorrow." "Actually," Mr. Morrison said, pulling out another document, "before you leave, I need to inform you both that David left specific instructions for his mother regarding the contents of the safety deposit box. Mrs. Fairfield, he wanted you to access it within the next few days, once you've completed the necessary documentation with the bank." He handed me a sealed envelope. "These are the bank documents and his personal key. The bank will need to verify the death certificate and process the paperwork before you can access the box. Usually takes about 3 business days. Stephanie's eyes fixed on the envelope in my hands like a hawk watching a mouse. I'm coming with you to the bank. I'm afraid that's not possible, Mr. Morrison interjected. The safety deposit box access is restricted to Mrs. Eleanor Fairfield only. Bank policy. This is insane, Stephanie sputtered. How do we even know there's anything valuable in there? It could be empty, or just sentimental junk. I stood up, clutching the envelope. I suppose we'll find out next week. As we filed out of the office, I could feel Stephanie's eyes boring into my back. In the parking lot, she cornered me beside my car. Eleanor, let's be reasonable about this. Whatever's in that box, we should share it. David would have wanted his wife to benefit from anything he left behind. For the first time since David's death, I almost smiled. You made it very clear that you don't believe David would have left me anything. Now suddenly you're concerned about sharing? I'm just saying, you're saying whatever you think will get you access to that safety deposit box. I unlocked my car door. But David was very specific. The contents are mine. Her mask slipped completely then, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Don't forget, Eleanor, you're homeless. You need my goodwill more than I need yours. I paused with my hand on the car door. Actually, Stephanie, I don't think I need anything from you at all. 3 business days later, after providing the death certificate and completing the bank's paperwork, I finally stood before safety deposit box Dagger 3337 at First National Bank. The bank manager, Mrs. Peterson, was expecting me. She'd obviously been briefed about the situation because she offered her condolences and escorted me personally to the vault area. Box 337 is one of our larger units, she explained, as we walked through the security doors. Your son rented it about 5 years ago and visited quite regularly. 5 years? David had been planning something for 5 years? Mrs. Peterson used her master key while I inserted David's key, and the box slid out smoothly. It was indeed large, about the size of a briefcase, and surprisingly heavy. Take all the time you need, Mrs. Peterson said, showing me to a private viewing room. I'll be at my desk when you're finished. Alone in the small, windowless room, I lifted the lid of the safety deposit box. The first thing I saw was a letter addressed to me in David's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Mom, it began, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Stephanie has probably shown you exactly who she really is. I'm sorry for that, but I'm not surprised. I've known for years what kind of person I married, and I've been preparing for this possibility. My heart raced as I continued reading. You gave us $40,000 for our house down payment. I know you thought of it as a loan, even though you never asked for repayment. I've been investing that money for the past 5 years, adding to it whenever possible. The money in the accompanying accounts isn't just repayment. It's what careful investing has grown into. I set the letter down with shaking hands and looked at the documents underneath. Bank statements, investment portfolios, account numbers. My eyes scanned the balance sheets, trying to make sense of the numbers. $185,000 in various investment accounts, all in my name, all accessible with proper documentation. I picked up David's letter again, hardly believing what I was reading. I also discovered that Stephanie has been telling people you contribute nothing to our household. What she doesn't mention is that our mortgage has been automatically paid from my salary account for the entire time you've lived with us. Any money you've given us went straight into investments for your future. The letter continued. I've been documenting everything, Mom. Every email, every text, every casual comment she's made about you. It's all in the folder labeled documentation. I thought you should know what kind of person has been living in our house. My vision blurred as I reached for the folder he'd mentioned. Inside were printed emails, text message screenshots, even photographs of credit card statements, evidence of years of manipulation and deceit. The final paragraph of David's letter made my eyes fill with tears. You deserve so much better than the way she's treated you. Take this money and build yourself a life where no one can make you feel unwanted ever again. And Mom, don't tell Stephanie about any of this until you're safely away from her. Trust me on this one. All my love, David. I sat in that little room for nearly an hour, reading through everything David had left for me. By the time I emerged, I had a clear picture of exactly how my daughter-in-law had been manipulating both of us for years. Mrs. Peterson helped me transfer all the documents to a large envelope and explained the process for accessing the investment accounts. As I walked to my car, my phone rang. "Eleanor?" Stephanie's voice was falsely sweet. "I was wondering if you'd like to come by for lunch today. We could discuss what you found in the safety deposit box." I smiled at my reflection in the car window. "That's very generous, Stephanie. I'll be there at noon." It was time for Stephanie to learn that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who surprise you most. I arrived at Stephanie's house, her house now, at exactly noon, carrying a small gift bag and wearing my best poker face. She answered the door in a flowing white dress that probably cost more than my monthly hotel bill, all smiles and false warmth. "Eleanor, I'm so glad you came. I've made your favorite chicken salad." Funny how she remembered my favorite foods now that she wanted something from me. The dining room table was set with her wedding china and fresh flowers. Stephanie had clearly put effort into this performance. She poured iced tea and chattered about the weather while I sat quietly, watching her work up to what she really wanted to discuss. "So," she finally said, settling into her chair with practiced grace, "I've been thinking about yesterday, about the safety deposit box." "Have you?" I sipped my tea calmly. "I know we've had our differences, but David would want us to support each other through this difficult time. Family should stick together. Family. Rich coming from the woman who'd thrown me out the day after her husband's funeral." "I couldn't agree more," I said evenly. Stephanie's eyes lit up, clearly thinking she'd found an opening. "I'm so relieved to hear you say that. I was worried you might be angry about having to find your own place so quickly, but you understand I needed space to grieve." "Of course." I took a bite of chicken salad. "Grief affects everyone differently." "Exactly." She leaned forward eagerly. "So about what David left you. I was thinking we could pool our resources, combine whatever was in that box with David's life insurance, maybe invest it together. I have some wonderful financial advisors." I bet she did. The same ones who'd been helping her make questionable spending decisions. "That's very thoughtful, Stephanie. But I'm curious, what makes you think there was anything valuable in the safety deposit box?" She paused, clearly not expecting the question. "Well, David was always so private about certain financial matters. He must have had a reason for keeping something separate." "Private? That's an interesting choice of words." "You know what I mean." She waved a hand dismissively. "Men and their financial planning. They never tell us wives everything." I set down my fork and looked directly at her. "Actually, Stephanie, I think David told you exactly as much as he thought you needed to know." Something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty. Maybe a hint of fear. "What did you find in the box, Eleanor?" The moment of truth was approaching, but I wasn't quite ready to play that card yet. Instead, I reached for the gift bag I'd brought. "I brought you something," I said, pulling out a small wrapped package. "A little thank you gift." She unwrapped it eagerly, revealing a framed photograph of David from his college graduation. Her face softened slightly. "Oh, Eleanor, this is lovely. Thank you. I thought you should have it. After all, you were such a devoted wife." The emphasis I placed on devoted wasn't lost on her. She looked up sharply, searching my face for hidden meaning. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing at all. I'm just appreciating how well you took care of my son." Stephanie set the photograph down carefully, her demeanor shifting. The fake sweetness was evaporating, replaced by something warier. "Eleanor, you're being cryptic. Just tell me what was in the safety deposit box." I smiled and took another sip of tea. "Documents mostly. Very interesting reading material." "What kind of documents?" "Oh, you know, financial records, investment statements, some correspondence." I paused meaningfully. "Quite a few printed emails and text messages." The color drained from Stephanie's face. "Text messages?" David was quite thorough in his record-keeping, especially toward the end. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos David had taken of various text conversations. "Would you like to see one? This is from about 6 months ago." I turned the screen toward her, showing a screenshot of her texting her sister. "God, I can't wait until that old bat finally moves out. Then we can turn her room into the home gym I've been wanting." Stephanie lunged for my phone, but I pulled it back smoothly. "There are dozens more," I said conversationally. David was apparently very good at documentation. "This next one is particularly enlightening. It's you texting Marcus about how you've been convincing David that I should contribute to household expenses when the mortgage was already budgeted from his salary. Stop. Stephanie's voice was barely a whisper. And then there's the email where you're laughing with your sister about how gullible I am, how easy it was to make me feel like a burden when you'd already planned to kick me out after David's death. I set the phone down and looked at her with what I hoped was mild curiosity. That was forward-thinking of you. By the way, planning my eviction while David was still alive? Stephanie's composure finally cracked completely. He had no right to save private messages. Actually, he had every right. It was his house, and you were discussing his mother. I leaned back in my chair. The question is, what are we going to do about this situation? What do you want? The mask was completely off now, revealing the calculating woman underneath. Want? I don't want anything from you, Stephanie. I never did. Then why are you doing this? What's the point of humiliating me? I considered the question seriously. You know, you're right. There's no point in humiliating you. You've done that perfectly well yourself. I don't understand. You threw me out of my home the day after my son's funeral. You told me I was worthless, that David felt sorry for me, that I'd contributed nothing to your household. I stood up slowly. But here's what you didn't understand about David. He saw everything. Every cruel comment, every manipulation, every lie you told. Stephanie was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. And you want to know the really beautiful part? I continued. He documented all of it, not to hurt you, but to protect me, because he knew that once he was gone, you'd show your true colors. You can't prove any of this would hold up in court. Court? I laughed, and the sound surprised even me. Oh, sweetie, I'm not taking you to court. Stephanie blinked, clearly confused by my response. You're not? Why would I? You've already given me everything I need. I don't understand what you're talking about. I pulled out the folder from David's safety deposit box and placed it on the table between us. David left me more than just text screenshots, Stephanie. He left me 5 years' worth of evidence showing exactly how you've been manipulating both of us. She stared at the folder like it might bite her. Bank statements showing that the house payments have been automatically deducted from David's salary for the entire time I've been living here. Email chains between you and Marcus discussing how to handle the Eleanor situation. Credit card statements showing luxury purchases made on the same days you told David we couldn't afford basic household items. Stephanie's breathing was becoming shallow. David saved all of that? David documented everything, including copies of the emails you sent to your friends calling him a pushover and joking about how easy it was to manipulate him into thinking I was a financial burden. That hit home. Stephanie flinched as if I'd slapped her. You want to know what I found most interesting? I continued, opening the folder. This email thread where you and Marcus discuss your long-term plans to have me declared incompetent so you could access my pension and Social Security. That's not... We never actually... No, you never actually followed through. Know why? Because David figured out what you were planning and took steps to protect me. Stephanie's eyes widened. What steps? You don't have anything worth protecting. Don't I? I smiled pleasantly. That's interesting, because according to these investment statements, I apparently have quite a bit worth protecting. Money that David had been carefully growing for the past 5 years. That's impossible. You're living in a hotel. I'm living in a hotel because I choose to be there while I figure out my next move, not because I can't afford better. The silence stretched between us as Stephanie processed this information. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head, trying to calculate how much money we might be talking about. How much? She finally asked. Excuse me? How much money did David leave you? I closed the folder and stood up. That's really none of your business, is it? I'm his wife. I have a right to know. You had a right to know what your husband left you, which, as I recall, was quite generous. The house, the cars, the life insurance, his retirement accounts. I'd say you made out very well. Stephanie shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You manipulative old witch. You're trying to steal what's rightfully mine. Steal? I raised an eyebrow. How exactly would I be stealing anything? Everything I have was given to me by my son, who had every legal right to dispose of his assets as he saw fit. He was my husband. Yes, he was. And apparently, he knew exactly what kind of wife you were. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Stephanie's face was flushed with anger and something that looked like panic. "I want to see those bank statements," she demanded. "I'm sure you do. Eleanor, I'm warning you." "You're warning me?" I laughed again, feeling oddly liberated. "Stephanie, honey, you threw me out of your house. You humiliated me at my son's funeral. You made it clear that you consider me worthless and unwanted. What exactly do you think you can threaten me with now?" Stephanie stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her recalibrating. The threats weren't working, so she was switching tactics. "Eleanor, please, let's be reasonable about this." Her voice took on a pleading tone. "I know I've been difficult since David died. I was grieving. I wasn't thinking clearly. But we're family. We should work together." "Family," I repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, you mentioned that before. Right after you told me David felt sorry for me and that I'd never contributed anything to your household. I didn't mean that. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean." "Oh, but you did mean them. That's what makes David's documentation so valuable. He saved you saying the same things multiple times to multiple people over a period of years." Stephanie's mask slipped again. "What do you want from me, Eleanor? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. I'm sorry I asked you to leave. I'm sorry for everything. Now can we please discuss this money situation like adults?" "There's nothing to discuss." "Of course there is. If David left you a significant amount of money, we need to plan how to manage it responsibly. I know excellent financial advisors. I could help you invest it properly." "You mean you could help me spend it properly?" "That's not what I said. It's what you meant." I picked up my purse. "Stephanie, let me be very clear about something. The money David left me isn't an inheritance that fell into my lap. It's the return on the $40,000 I gave you for your house down payment, plus 5 years of careful investment." Her mouth fell open. $40,000? Did you think it was a gift? Did you think I just handed over my life savings out of the goodness of my heart with no expectation of repayment? David said it was a family contribution. David was trying to preserve your pride. And mine. But he never forgot it was a loan. I could see her mind racing, trying to process this new information. If I'd invested $40,000 5 years ago, and David had been growing it. "How much is it worth now?" she whispered. I pulled out my phone and opened one of the banking apps the bank had helped me set up. The account balance filled the screen, and I turned it toward her. $185,000. Stephanie's face went white. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. "That's impossible." David was a careful investor, and apparently he was very motivated to make sure his mother was taken care of. But that's almost as much as the life insurance policy." "Yes, it is. That money should be part of the estate. It should be split between us." "Should it? Based on what legal principle? Based on the fact that I'm his wife and you're just his mother." The casual cruelty in those words, "just his mother," hit me like a physical blow. But instead of pain, I felt something else. Clarity. "You know what, Stephanie? You're absolutely right. I am just his mother. The woman who gave birth to him, raised him, supported him through college, and lent him the down payment for the house where you threw me out like garbage." I stood up and slung my purse over my shoulder. And apparently, that was enough for David to make sure I'd never have to depend on anyone's charity again. "Wait," Stephanie called as I headed toward the door. "Eleanor, wait. We can work this out. Please, just sit down. Let's talk about this rationally." I paused in the doorway and turned back to face her. "What exactly do you think we need to work out? The money situation, our relationship, everything." She was speaking quickly now, panic making her voice tight. "Look, I know I made mistakes. I was stressed about David's death, worried about finances, and I took it out on you. But we can fix this." "I'm sure you were worried about finances," I said quietly. "But not for the reasons you're claiming." "What's that supposed to mean?" I pulled out one more document from David's folder, one I'd been saving for last. "It means David also documented your spending habits, Stephanie, including the $15,000 you charged to credit cards in the month before he died." Her face went ashen. "Spa treatments, designer clothes, a weekend in New York with your sister, all while telling David you were worried about money for groceries. That's not—" "I wasn't—" "You weren't what? planning to live off his life insurance while throwing out the inconvenient mother-in-law who might interfere with your lifestyle? Stephanie collapsed back into her chair, the fight going out of her. You don't understand the pressure I was under. What pressure? Everyone expected me to be the perfect wife, the perfect hostess, David's colleagues, the neighbors, my family. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to maintain appearances? I looked at her sitting there in her designer dress, in her beautiful house, surrounded by luxury, complaining about the burden of appearances. No, Stephanie, I don't, because I was too busy actually taking care of your husband while you were busy spending his money. I loved David. You loved what David could provide for you. There's a difference. She was crying now, ugly tears that smeared her perfect makeup. I can't lose everything. I can't go back to being nobody. You're not nobody, Stephanie. You're David's widow. You inherited a $500,000 house, a $200,000 life insurance policy, and his retirement accounts. You're financially set for life if you manage it properly. But it's not enough for the life I planned. Then maybe you planned the wrong life. I walked toward the door again. And this time she didn't try to stop me with words. Instead, there was a soft thud behind me. I turned to see Stephanie slumped forward in her chair, her face gray, her breathing shallow. For a moment, I thought she might actually be having a medical emergency. Then I realized what I was seeing. Complete defeat. The moment when someone realizes they've lost everything they thought they were entitled to, and there's no manipulation or charm or cruelty that can get it back. I can't, she whispered. I can't lose everything. You're not losing everything, Stephanie. You're losing the things that never belonged to you in the first place. I left her there in her expensive dining room, surrounded by her wedding china and her carefully constructed life, and walked out into the sunshine of my new beginning. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just justice, served exactly when it's needed most. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it comes with a hefty bank balance and the knowledge that the child you raised turned out to be exactly the man you hoped he'd become. David had taken care of me after all, just like he'd promised he always would. Even from beyond the grave, my son had kept his word, and that, more than any amount of money, was the greatest gift he could have given me. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.